One of the most important issues in Hawaii is, of course, education. I'm Malia Zimmerman, and this is News Behind the News. And today, I want to welcome two people who are experts in education. One is Lynn Finnegan. She is a local resident, former state representative, and also the head of the charter school network right now. And she'll tell us more about that. And Lisa Snell, who is a very famous person in the United States, and she is an expert education person. You're director of education and child
welfare
at the Reason
Director
Foundation.
of Education for short. That works.
Yes, exactly. So you are you know all about education all across the nation. So we're really thankful that you're here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Sure, and I know I've heard your name many times over the years about your expertise. So it's an honor to have you here, an honor to meet you.
Thank you.
So, Lynn, why don't you start this off? Why did you go from politics into education? But that was always one of your passions, right?
Definitely. I have a passion for public education, and sent my kids, both my son and my daughter. Now they don't go to a public school, but they went to Voyager Public Charter School, and that's where I first learned about public charter school and school choice. And just a real passion for that, as we know as parents of kids that, we really want a good, strong foundation in education, and we want schools to be of high quality. Just started getting involved in that movement. So it was a passion of mine when I was at the legislature, and continues to be until today.
Yeah, you think that being in the legislature was hard. Tackling education has got to be much tougher.
Yes, it definitely is connected, because I was on the education committee, and that was a focus of my efforts there at the Capitol. But now that I get to do some hands-on work with charter schools, it's much more rewarding, and I'm really enjoying my job.
Okay, we're going to get more into what you do there, but I want to ask Lisa about Reason Foundation and what the work is that you do there.
So Reason Foundation is like a free market think tank, and we have 3 divisions really. Reason.com, which is our magazine, which is actually the 4th largest political magazine in the country. Then Reason TV, where we do TV productions about issues like education. So like today we have up a video of Milton Friedman for his 100th birthday, and he's the father of school choice and a Nobel Prize winning economist. And then we have Reason Foundation, which does studies and policy work. And so I kind of handle the issue of education from a school choice perspective. So we're for markets in education, and we want parents to be empowered and have more school choice, and we want there to be a little bit more competition, and just that it's performance-based, and that you reward schools, and that parents are able to pick schools based on good information, the same way we would choose where we get our cell phone or how we get our food. And so we look at that. And today, actually, we launched our website called Reason 24/7, where we're trying to be kind of like the Huffington Post, and we're going to be a big news aggregator. So if you haven't been to Reason.com lately, it'd be a great time to check it out, because we've spent a lot of money to revamp everything, and it's pretty cool.
And so it's Reason.com and then Reason247.com?
Yeah, it's just Reason.com, and then everything else is integrated and linked from there. So anything you wanted to see about the Reason Foundation, you could start with Reason.com, and then you could get everywhere else from there.
Great. Okay, now tell me about, we're going to talk about just maybe education, into the quality of education, what the challenges are, and what the good things that are happening in the country. But Lynn, maybe you can just explain, before we get into that, a little bit about the charter school network, how many schools you represent, and so on.
So we're the Hawaii Public Charter Schools Network. We represent 32 schools, with our latest conversion school, Lapahoihoi Community Public Charter School, that has joined us. We're now at 10,000. We're breaking 10,000 students this upcoming school year. And our mission is to support and advocate for public charter schools. And we do that in a variety of ways, through sharing of data, so that parents will know about the schools that they're going to, especially within the charter school sector, about helping and supporting different things that maybe the charters don't have, that they should have access to, whether it be federal funding, whether it be facilities funding, whether it be changing the law. And we've done a bunch of work on that in this past year.
Lisa, would you mind giving us an overview of
Sure.
education in throughout the country and what some of the challenges are? And if you want to talk at all about charter schools and what the, or freedom of choice, since it's Milton Friedman's birthday, it's in honor of him. Why don't you take it away?
So there's really, first of all, there's a lot of good news. There's more school choice than ever, and from a lot of different angles, parents have more choices and are empowered, and that's a good thing. We have more kinds of schools than we've ever had. But the big picture kind of is, over the last 100 years, we've had a big public investment in education. And so nationally, the amount of taxpayer dollars, so we spend about, just at the federal level, we've spent, $300 billion in the last 3 years or so on education, if you count, the bailout and the American Investment and Recovery era act, where a lot of money went to schools. And so we've spent a lot of money in the last 100 years, and yet, especially since the 1970s, if you look at our outcomes, most things are flat. So graduation rates, SAT scores, so the money's gone up and up and up, but our performance as a nation, when we compare ourselves to other countries, we're just kind of middling to mediocre. We just don't do that well in math and science. Even our highest performing students aren't that competitive against highest performing students. But yet, because we do have a free market economy, we can kind of compensate for that. Because, without freedom and economics, you can be the smartest country in the world, and, your innovation will not necessarily be rewarded. So we've kind of fallen back on that for a long time. But, what we want is more school choice. So right now in the United States, there was a bet that this guy, Greg Forrester, that works at the Milton Friedman Foundation, he had with this guy from the Washington Post, and they said there wouldn't be a lot of new voucher programs. But in fact, right now, in the last 2 years, they've really called it the year of school choice. The Wall Street Journal wrote an op-ed called the year of school choice. And we're at 32 school voucher and tax credit programs. And then in addition to that, we have over 5,600 charter schools in the nation serving more than 2 million kids. And so things like homeschooling are growing, technology blended learning, where virtual schools, and the whole idea though with all of this is that, like other kinds of things, we want to have the money follow the child. And that's really the root of school choice. So if you think about higher education, when people pick a college, residential assignment has nothing to do with that, right? Even if they get subsidies and tax credits to go to college, that money follows them to whatever college they choose, whether it's the University of Hawaii or it's Stanford. But the funding goes to that school, and everyone knows it, and they're at least competing. And even though higher education has some issues, it looks a lot different than K-12. And you can find a lot of information out about the quality. The U.S. News and World Report publishes lists, and you can find the best medical school, the best agriculture school. You have a lot of information as a consumer, but we don't necessarily have that in K-12, and the money doesn't follow the child. So the cool thing about all these choices is it makes the funding go with the kid, and schools actually have something to lose if they're not high quality and kids choose to go somewhere else. So it changes the incentives for schools, and that's a good thing.
Wow, that's good news to have progress.
Yeah, so we've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years especially.
Great. Okay, what about in Hawaii? Can you give an overview? I know you know a lot about obviously the charter schools, but yes, can you give a big picture overview about maybe some of the strengths and challenges in the public school system in Hawaii?
The strengths and challenges. Strengths would be that we do have charter school law. That we have along, in the past decade, have progressed so that we could grow the movement. Although, albeit that it isn't as strong as we would like it to be, and it's not as equitable between what we would call DOE schools and what we would call charter schools.
In terms of funding, equitable
in terms of funding, in terms of different types of support. It's not equitable all around. And then I think one of the negative or the challenges that I think also spreads not only throughout education, both DOE and charter, but throughout our whole government, is that we have maybe some inefficient processes and, you know, those types of things. And so when you have charter schools that are on the cutting edge, say, of different types of technology or whatever it might be in just operating their school, it would be difficult for to communicate or be compliant federally with the state. And we just got through with a conversation on, do we hold ourselves back? Do we develop some way to interpret this information because we happen to have a better system or a better way of doing things, so that we can, you know, and hold ourselves back to meet where the rest of the systems, government systems are? And, you know, I would argue that we're here as charter schools to help push those types of things forward instead of succumbing or, you know, meeting the old way of doing things. So that doesn't necessarily mean pedagogy or, you know, what you're doing in education, because DOE, you know, can be pretty innovative in some of their environments. Some schools are doing some wonderful things. But I am talking about, you know, operations of schools and how we might be able to improve on that. On the benefit side for our schools is, you know, with the existing way of assessments through NCLB, we have seen some growth in both the charter school sector as well as the traditional sector. And as much as we would like to see more growth, there are some other more transparent ways of taking a look at student achievement and student growth and school growth and what schools are doing for kids. There's this thing called the ESEA flexibility waiver. And through that, I think the direction that the DOE is going is there's going to be more transparency, not just to measure whether or not a school gets kids to proficiency levels and at what percentage, but what it will do is, for a parent, it'll inform the parent. So the parent will be able to say, what have you done for my child? Did they make a year's growth? Did they make 2 years growth in a certain amount of time? That's very promising, I think, as a parent that wants to see progress for your child.
One of the things I know, covering the legislature for, I think it's been 20 years now, there's a big battle between, you know, the unions that want to keep things the way they are in every facet of government versus maybe some innovation. And I know when Governor Lingle was in, she tried to get the money to follow the child, and it does do that in some ways. You're talking about competition and money following the child. But, you know, Hawaii's had its challenges with its education system. We've seen it ranked poorly, especially in 2000, I think it was 2009, 2010, when there were problems with funding, and we cut schools back, public schools back to 4 days a week in some cases. We've got a lot of negative national attention, poor rankings. You know, I was looking that up today. And so we've improved a little bit. We hear now and then, and we're a race to the top school, but we've been put on notice that we're you know, on suspension and so on. So we definitely have our challenges, and I'm not sure exactly how that'll ever get fixed. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Not the charter schools I'm talking about, but just in general, the public schools, the challenges that the public schools have faced. And I'm sure that's true throughout the country, even though we are ranked sometimes 49th worst, or 49th best, I should say, or 48th.
Well, we're right with you in California.
You're right. Yeah. So you can feel our pain.
Yeah.
But we have heard things about, you know, some scores improving, some schools shining, like you were saying. So
and definitely, like on the National Assessment of Education Progress, which is like the federal benchmark, which is different than the state tests, Hawaii actually has made quite a bit of progress, and you know, that's a positive thing. And I think all these things that you're attempting, but I think until there's a way to decentralize power to the parents and to the schools, as long as, you know, you're a unique state because you have one state board of education, which, you know, is something like where I live in LA, we have a huge school board with, you know, 800,000 students, which is way more than what you have in Hawaii, but still it's like that centralized control that a lot of money gets taken off the top before it goes to either charter schools or traditional schools. And so as long as, you know, the central bureaucracy is not shrinking and it's controlling the pot of money, you know, going to schools, and until more and more people have, so I heard, right, that you have 10,000 kids enrolled in charters, and Carolyn Hawksby, who is a professor for both, she's worked at both Harvard and Stanford in economics, but she's written a lot about competition in schools. And one of the things she said is that when 6% of the students leave the traditional system, that starts exerting a lot of pressure. And I know in LA, where I live, they've lost almost 200,000 kids, LA Unified, to charter schools, and they've completely changed their behavior, and they're trying to change it rapidly. And until the money went to like a competitive system, they did the same thing over and over. And so probably the best way to fix the schools in Hawaii is to continue to grow, competition, whether it's from, technology or charter schools or any other kind of possible school choice, homeschooling. The more the kids have the right of exit, the more the traditional system has to change. And, that can be kind of a slow process, and it can seem very frustrating. But to think, that you are at 10,000 kids now, and you only have, under 200,000 kids in your whole state,
180.
That's a pretty significant chunk of change for the whole state. And so I would encourage the policies that support those rights of exit for those parents to make decisions about their own kids. That's really the only thing that the system's ever going to pay attention to, is the money. Like, once someone else starts drawing the kids in their dollars, then they try to start improving quality and doing things differently. So I think you're on the right track. It's just that it can be frustrating and seem slow. And the other thing is, any effort you can make to level the playing field so that the facilities are equal, the funding is equal. There's nothing. It used to be charter schools were kind of viewed as, oh, they're an alternative school and they should be saving us money, but why should the funding be going to traditional schools at the expense of the competition? It's one thing if you're reducing the overall bucket of money or you're doing something else to save money, but the political system shouldn't be favoring one kind of school over another.
Which they do in Hawaii, from what I understand. Charter schools get less funding, right?
So the more that, you can work to fix those kind of loopholes that make, charter schools have to follow very restrictive collective bargaining rules, have to have less funding, not as much access to facilities, all the kind of issues that you're already working on, the more robust the charter schools will become as they have more equal footing.
And if I could share something in a positive light on how hopefully some of these changes or some of these flexibilities that charters have could affect like the traditional DOE system, is that, as you know, we don't have our master contracts in place yet for HSTA, HGA, or any of that really going on just yet. And in the charter world, we're given through law the ability to do what's called supplemental contracts. And in these supplemental contracts, after the master contract has been, well, this is the way that it's interpreted, after the master contract has been negotiated and finalized, that a school board can come to the table with its teachers or its employees and the collective bargaining unit and negotiate something different in a supplemental contract. And what this is able to, some schools to do is they may have like little tweaks from the master contract, or at times they may be able to negotiate extended learning time, which is a real positive thing across the nation that has been able to fuel change in outcomes for kids. And another thing would be, if it's a real empowering type of contract, at times you have a teacher peer evaluation that goes on that is allowable through a supplemental contract. And so you're seeing the accountability in a very supportive and proactive way to support teachers in the environment of their charter school, and then saying, hey, maybe this particular field is not a match for you. But more often than not, you're seeing that support from other teachers to say, hey, you know what? We don't all come to the table being great teachers, but we're going to help you get there because we want you to be a part of this environment. And that contract might have the flexibility to do that. And I think that there's lessons that the traditional school and the union as a whole can learn from that kind of negotiations, where you're looking at a specific environment, one charter school that is wanting to do things a little differently and need that management and teacher or employee experience to be more collaborative and in-house, to meet the needs.
And I would just say that on a national level, that's exactly what's happening, is the autonomy and the empowerment that teachers have in charter schools are leading to like real change in large labor contracts. So going back to Los Angeles, John Deasy, who's the superintendent there, just negotiated this huge contract with LA Unified, which is one of the biggest teachers unions in the United States, where basically they agreed to give all schools in LA charter-like autonomy, so that principals would have, front-end control over their personnel without forced placement, that they could decide their school day hours, extended time, things like that you're talking about. And I can guarantee that without the 200,000 kids that left LA for charter schools and the fact that these charter schools have autonomy, the unions never would have negotiated those kind of empowerment things for teachers within the traditional system. And so we are starting to see, like New York City and large contracts that are starting to look more charter-like with more flexibility, things like seniority going out the window for how, layoffs are decided. There's been a few states that have outlawed that. And these are things really that would have been unthinkable, like even 5 years ago, that any union would ever give a concession against seniority, or that any union would ever, let principals have the power to choose all of their personnel on the front end, regardless of, district personnel issues. So I think we're seeing a lot of national progress, and we just have to keep working.
And it was really interesting as as I was able to learn more about what's happening on the ground with charter schools. It was pretty early on that some of these, I don't know what they're called, but the union district heads, I guess, that were willing to come to the table and say, with a charter school, that we really didn't have that much pressure on them at the time, but they did, it was a positive thing that they would come forward and say, okay, if you have agreement, within this school, let's give it a try. And so there were a lot of, to give our union that kind of credit for coming to the table, but it doesn't exist like that throughout the whole state. So how might we be able to convince other, districts or the union as a whole to be able to support that kind of innovation and flexibility is something that, we're looking forward to having more conversation on.
Now, I want to ask you both to think about some shining examples in the country of, and of course in Hawaii, of schools that are working, or whether it be a charter school or a regular public school, something that you think should be noteworthy for people to know about, and also for Hawaii. What, maybe you can give a little more of an overview about how many schools there are. And I know you said pretty soon on your website you're going to be featuring, on your Facebook, for your schools, you're going to be featuring different schools every day, right?
That's right.
In celebration of your 10,000 student mark.
And back to school season.
And back to school, right. So I don't know if, I don't want to get you in trouble by featuring, by saying, 2 or 3 schools, but
sure.
they
I take turns because they're all really wonderful schools.
Oh, good.
But if I could feature, one school that, I'll talk about this school called Waters of Life. You might have heard of it. In the past, they were close to shutting down. There was some issues having to do with financial management and other things like that.
Is this the one on the Big Island?
This is the one on the Big Island. It's in Mountain View. And so a few years back, they came very close to closing down. There was a lawsuit that challenged the close, and they weren't able to close down Waters of Life. But what they were able to do was pretty much reconstitute the school. And when they did reconstitute that school, a new principal came in, a new board came in, and within a year and a half, they were able to turn that school around. And we've seen significant improvement on student achievement and test scores, and just financial management, being able to go from the red to the black with transparency in all of their financial documents. And what I would propose to folks out there in understanding charter schools is, when DOE does something wrong, it gets in the newspaper, boom, there's a law, there's a regulation, you can't do that anymore. And a lot of the times you put up all of these false barriers that don't really even get to the problem, and you restrict the DOE or schools from responding and correction. And so what happened in this case is, in that environment of a charter school where you're threatened to close, you reconstitute the school, they had to report to their authorizer or their charter school review panel almost, I think, on a monthly basis, and they were making all of these changes. Now, what I would say to an experience like that is, you have charter schools that can respond, can make those changes, and you can see the difference in the change because they're given that kind of flexibility. And then you have some situations where, you're pounded in the paper, this was wrong at the DOE, this was wrong at the DOE, or whatever, and then you end up, a law passes or a policy passes, and there really is no answer to how you're going to figure out that's the solution for that particular school or issue. And I would say that charter schools, in the general sense of being able to have that flexibility for improvement, is a positive thing for Hawaii.
Absolutely.
Now, what about on a national level?
So on a national level, I would say the model to choose would be something like, there's been a huge move that not only the money follows the child to the school, but actually to the individual instruction. So you could take courses from multiple providers. You wouldn't be tied to just one institution. And I think technology's role in the next 10 years is really underestimated, how they're going to change the environment. But one school that goes along with the technology is called Rocket Ship Education. And they're a charter school out of California, and they use a blended learning model. And they've really been able to reduce their labor costs by almost 40%. Kids have, very specific individualized lesson plans with their own computers. And then for like 3 hours of the day where they're doing their own individualized work, and then the rest of the day they have credentialed teachers that teach them. But during the time when they're working on computers, they've really reduced their labor costs. And Rocket Ship is one of the highest performing schools in California. So I think we don't know yet what all these models are going to look like. But there may be like 1,000 flowers blooming, and we need an environment and a financial environment that supports all this kind of innovation.
Yeah.
We only have about a minute left on the show. See, I promised you before it started that it would go quickly. So do you have any final thoughts about what's in the future for, I guess, for the nation, like you said about the flowers blooming? I like that analogy. And for Hawaii?
Just really quickly, I would say support our charter schools. It's, great innovation on doing things differently. And we need that support because it's very tough for the schools to survive in this kind of economic climate and with the kinds of supports that are available to them.
Lisa?
And I would say the same for the nation. I mean, the more that we can move from, in healthcare we talk about, we're moving to a single payer. But right now we have a single payer and a single provider in education. We're even farther behind in the sense that the government controls 99% of the funding. So the more we can decentralize that money and give it to the parents and create a lot of different kinds of choices, the more quality in education will improve.
Great. Now, what are your websites that people can check out? We already talked about reason.com, but what's your website?
HawaiiCharterSchools.com. So Hawaii Charter Schools with an S.com. And we have lots of information on there for you.
Great. And then we'll also, of course, tell people, make sure to check out the new Reason website, the revamped.
Yeah, reason.com. So
all right.
Come see us.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn,
Thanks,
Finnegan,
Maria.
and Lisa Snell. This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.